So, welcome everyone to a Spry podcast featuring Sarah Early, my colleague here at Spry. And today we're going to discuss revenue cycle management. So, it's really great to have you aboard. And thank you for making the time. The purpose and the structure of this is we're going to go topic by topic. And then these topics should be used as tools for private practice owners or for clinicians that want a better understanding. So, thank you, Sarah, and welcome here.
Thank you so much. I know it's every clinician's favorite topic, revenue cycle.
Oh, of course. I mean, who doesn't wake up in the morning screaming, I want to know more about revenue cycle management? It's
Yeah. Treating patients, revenue cycle management.
Absolutely. So I think first, let me introduce you. Sarah comes to us with 20 years of healthcare experience. She started as a pharmacy tech and worked her way into the insurance companies, eventually overseeing a pharmacy department at Molina Health for about 5 years. Following the transition into primary care for low-income seniors and a PT-focused revenue cycle management platform. She's the director of revenue cycle team at Team Rehab for 4 years and director of two departments and Prompt EHR for 2 years following that. The last 2 years, she has worked as an independent consultant supporting the success of small practices. In terms of education, Sarah has BS in applied physics, BBA, and MBA. She is also a magician and a consultant at the Merlin Group. So maybe we'll do a metric trick because the wizard is the number one thing that is called reporting the EDI magic. So, Sarah, thank you and welcome here. I will give you a couple of minutes to introduce yourself also.
Thank you for the introduction. I don't know if I really need to do much of an introduction after that. I've been in the industry for a long time. Been focusing on revenue cycle for about half of my career at this point. So I'm familiar with things from the perspective of working at an insurance company and reviewing claims authorization requests, as well as the perspective of the provider and fighting against the insurance company to get yourself paid for the work that you're doing. I've worked with a lot of teams um, outside of just team rehabilitation as a consultant, working to get not only coding and revenue cycle metrics on track, but to help with clinical documentation to support the work that you're doing and getting paid for your skill and expertise.
Awesome. Thank you. And then it is wonderful. And it's one of those jobs and one of those professions that stays behind the scenes, but is exponentially important because if you can't get paid for what you do, it really does not matter how good of a clinician you are. It doesn't matter how successful of your outcomes are because if you don't get paid, you go broke and you have to close your doors. So, Sarah, thank you for helping clinicians keep their doors open. And not only that, but potentially make a profit. Um, so first, let's before we go into the weeds of revenue cycle management, let's paint a picture into the infrastructure. What is revenue cycle? What are the steps in revenue cycle? And in private practice, what are some of the fundamentals that need to be acknowledged and brought to light?
So, a lot of people just think of it as billing, as the things that happen after you've signed your note and sent it out into the world. In reality, it starts when you're scheduling the patient. So just getting that intake, your demographics correct, getting the patient's insurance correct, verifying the benefits, the authorization, making sure that your plan of care is compliant. Once it gets to the therapist, there's a huge aspect of documentation in terms of justifying the codes that you're using. If you're dispensing DME along with your PT or OT, justifying which garment or device is dispensed so that the patient can get that covered in your documentation is huge. Um, the documentation portion in PT is where your charge capture happens. That's where your codes get put in place and then sent out to the biller. From that point, it's more of the traditional kind of revenue cycle that you're thinking, where your billers are getting your claims out the door, following up when the insurance doesn't pay, doesn't respond, denies your claim. They jump through all the hoops, probably bug you to update your notes. And then reconcile to make sure that what you have in the bank is what you have back from the payer. So it's a lot more holistic, I think, than a lot of people realize, in that it starts from the second the patient calls you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we tend to overgeneralize and put everything in the same revenue cycle bucket, but you see the many layers and complexities that exist in this bucket, right? So it's not just one bucket, it's buckets. So let's dig into these buckets and let's take a look at the first bucket that you've outlined, which is the write notes like you'll be evoked later. So the documentation part, like we write notes clinically.
Mhm.
In my honest confession, you just want to get out of the note as quickly as possible. Like it's the least favorite part of your clinical process. So you don't write note thinking that it will ever be used later. You think that as long as you just tap something on paper and you finish it, and it's done and it's gone into the ether. So can you please explain why your notes is just the start of this process and why it's so important to have a good viable note for future use?
So your notes will come back to haunt you. So don't be haunted by the ghosts of documentation past. When payers are doing audits, it's actually a 2-year look back period. So from the time you finish that note and get that claim over to your revenue cycle team, 2 years later, you could have Blue Cross Blue Shield coming back asking you questions about your clinical documentation. And you have AI bots reading through it at this point in time, or just folks who weren't there, don't know the patient, and don't understand the broader context. So if you have notes that are not robust enough to justify the necessity of care, you could end up having your funds clawed back 2 years later. In fact, there's no legal statute on how far they can look back. I've always felt that wasn't particularly fair because we have a timely filing limit. If we don't get it to you in 120 days, you won't pay us. During COVID, I was still with Team Rehab, and the payers were generating revenue by going 5 years back, 10 years back, and auditing the ghosts of documentations past to take funds back from us. So it absolutely does happen. And it's important to make sure that everything is correct the first time because you don't want to be working through addendums on a 10-year-old case.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's so important to know that once you finalize your note, that note is a living document that can
Hmm.
be referenced 2 years later,
Yes.
5 years later, 10 years
Yes.
later. So like being aware of that node living, becoming a living document is really important. So don't just exit out of it quickly. Make sure that this node can justify the services you provided. Otherwise, the services would be denied, and you just delivered an hour of free time. And can you afford to deliver hours of free time, right? Without substantiation.
Exactly. Exactly.
So that's perfect. And then let's talk into that diagnosis codes. I think that's the other part of let me just quickly get out of it, pick a first diagnosis code that pops up because it's so like effective, because I want to go help the patient. I want to go treat the patient. I don't want to care about the DX codes, the ICD-10 codes. But can you please elaborate why it's so important to pick the right diagnosis code for your treatment in terms of reimbursability and in terms of downstream effects as well?
Absolutely. So a lot of the times what I see is clinicians wanting to pick the injury as their first diagnosis. Keep in mind the order that you put them in matters, both in terms of the claim itself and in terms of each individual CPT, how you're pointing it at those codes. So the first one to the payers, that's the primary reason that the patient is there. It's the primary reason you're using the code. And then we have secondary, tertiary, and quaternary from there. There is a word for the fourth. I learned it recently. It's quaternary. Uh, so the instinct a lot of times that I see is to put the injury code first and say they're here because they broke their leg. The insurance company actually prefers from clinicians to see the um, your clinical decision code as the leading diagnosis. So, what functional deficit are you treating? What is the symptom? For the most part, I say they assume an injury happened, right? They're in physical therapy. So there's either some sort of chronic condition or an injury that the insurance company is assuming. And what they want to see is your clinical judgment codes really leading that injury code to understand why it is that you are treating the patient. I tend to kind of frame it to PTs as, are you actually fixing the broken leg or are you fixing the muscle weakness and the gait issues that they're having because of the broken leg?
So that is such an important part to emphasize, that the order of your ICD-10 codes matter, and focus on what you are treating, not on a clinical diagnosis, right? What the follow-up would be, just to stay on that for a little bit longer. What are some of the most common mistakes you see, and how do you correct it, even if you already created a wrong ICD-10 code? So you already did your evaluation and you did pick diagnosis instead of what you were treating. So what are some of the steps to remediate some of this?
If there is an issue with non-payment or underpayment because of a diagnosis code issue, you may see your billing staff sending the claim back to you with a note and saying, "Hey, the payer wants to see your treatment codes first, not fill in the blank." So, we can support you in fixing that by sending a claim correction to the payers. You just get paid a lot faster if you put them in the correct order the first time around. So it's not anything we can't fix, but a delay to cash is never a good thing, especially for small practices.
Yeah. So it is perfect. And I think that's one of the strengths of having a system like Spry that has an entire logic built into it, so that if there is an underpayment, like using Spry RCM system, can give you a more of a reassurance that even if the mistake is made, that you don't have to live with it forever. You can still have steps of
Absolutely.
correction, right?
Absolutely. There's a lot of things that we can fix after the fact. Maybe not a missed authorization, but coding errors, missed modifiers. We can help you fix that after the fact. And having a platform that helps your billers do that more efficiently, communicate with you more efficiently is very helpful in mitigating the delay to cash as much as possible.
Yeah, right. That's excellent. So now let's dig into the CPT codes and physical therapy, and just, I think, allied health in general. We're CPT poor profession. We really have a very shallow bucket of CPT
Yes.
codes, right? Like compared to the rest of the healthcare, where you can select so many different interventions. We really have four. And these four interventions, even there, you are nuanced because some are reimbursed at a higher rate than others, and there's a lot of ambiguity about how these codes are being labeled and how they can be used. So there is a tension point of clinicians using CPT codes that reimburse 35 to 40% lower than the CPT codes that can be used. So can you go a little bit into that CPT code logic? Also, CPT code reimbursement based on a percentage of discounting from the payers, and what are some of the steps our providers, our partners can do to increase the valuation of their intervention without actually breaking any ethical or clinical boundaries?
I think it goes beyond just coding or, really coding for what you're doing. Um, a lot of times there's codes that just don't get put on at all because folks don't realize they can bill for that. I'll use the example of biofeedback, strapping codes. These are a lot of things that clinicians are doing already, possibly documenting for already, and then they're just not billing for the services that they're rendering. So a good thing to do definitely is to review the services that you're offering and make sure that you are actually billing for all the work that you're doing. Because there is a lot of missed opportunity in especially the scrapping codes and the biofeedback. In terms of the biggest error that I see is, the issue between 97110 and 97530, your therapeutic activities versus your Therax. And the reimbursement is significantly different between the two of them. Your 530 gets you a lot more reimbursement than your 110. And, it's not about upcoding or trying to bill for services that you're not doing. The difference between a 530 and a 110 is the intent. So the 110 is I'm having the patient do, these quadricep exercises to strengthen their quads, period. Well, if you add to that the intent that you're doing this because one of their goals is to walk up the stairs unassisted, and this will help them walk up the stairs unassisted, suddenly exactly what you're doing can then be coded as a 530. So it's documenting your clinical intent so that you are justifying what you're already doing and can get paid for the skill work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So much of it is in the matter of interpretation, right? And all things considered, if you think about the ambiguity, everything is a therapeutic activity when you find
Hmm.
yourself in a therapeutic service. So it's not up
Exactly.
billing; it's just a matter of interpretation. And we
Exactly.
get stuck on billing these low reimbursing codes uh, without a need. And we're already working on very tight margins. We're working on a very low profit margins. So why not get extra at 5, 10% reimbursement by actually just classifying things for what they are? Not exercise is an activity that helps someone improve function. Another angle at this is, and let's talk about this for a few seconds. The payers have a reason why they incentivize one CPT code over another because payers want you to focus on function and activity. They don't want you to just exercise with people, right? And so think of it this way. And what would you say that, like, by billing only therapeutic exercise instead of therapeutic activity, you're actually showing that you're a low value or lower value product to the payer than if you're billing therapeutic activity.
And when you get into things like workman's compensation, that's where you see work conditioning and work hardening being valued over all the other standard codes because what the payer wants on both sides is for the patient to get healthy and back to their regular productivity as soon as possible.
That is awesome. So just make a note of it, especially when you are working with your clinical staff that doesn't have a full understanding of why they're doing these specific CPT codes, right? They just it's the path dependence is I do it because I've done it before, not because it makes sense to me. So that's wonderful. So let's talk into about utilization. And I love that your chapter, utilization bat signal or kick me sign, which is right on, right? So let's talk about utilization from the standpoint of what is utilization and why can it be a favorable, positive sign to a payer, or it can be a negative sign that please audit me. Like what is utilization? Let's paint it, and then how do we optimize it?
Absolutely. I do typically use the metaphor of the kitten side with utilization and with certain modifiers. Some of it is asking for an audit without knowing you're asking for an audit. Um, that can look like either long duration visits. Are you routinely having 6 units of time, 6 time units every single visit. Or it can look like many, many, many visits. Do you have patients that are routinely coming for, 6 months, 12 months? Um, for diagnoses where the payer would expect to see, maybe 12 visits. So if you are routinely having exceptionally long visits or exceptionally long episodes of care, you will likely be inviting an audit from payers. There are some clinics that specialize in more complex patients. There's definitely specialties that need that longer duration of care. And we can circle back to a previous point and say that's where your diagnosis codes are very important because that communicates the need for these longer episodes of care to the payers. Uh, some payers, like Blue Cross Blue Shield, will have more punitive kind of programs as well, where if they're not seeing the justification in your high utilization, you get one warning. And then if it happens again the next year, they will remove you as a provider from the Blue Cross network. And that won't just be at your current place of employment. That's across anywhere where you work. So there could be downstream impacts to the career if you're trying to work places where being part of these payer networks is important.
Yeah, so think about this way, right? Like that overutilization or like inefficient utilization. But how
Mhm.
much of it is the intentionality and clarity in your process, right?
Exactly.
Because the payer only has your documentation to go by. They're not there in a
Exactly.
room with you. So what are some of the cues and what are some of the suggestions would you have for someone who is treating a more complex patient population, people with multiple comorbidities? What are some of the steps to protect yourself from this utilization
Yep.
paradox?
So it's, make sure again that your diagnosis codes are demonstrating the level of complexity that your patients have. And we'll highlight an upcoming point of, make sure that you are updating your documentation regularly. So it's not getting repetitive. Your goals are updating regularly, showing progression, maybe having some new goals. Um, and that you're always justifying the necessity of clinical intervention.
Yeah. So it's like the proof is in the pudding and the proof is in
Mhm.
the documentation. So make sure your
Yep.
documentation is solid. So then timelines. Timelines are important, and we'll discuss it in depth. But I am guilty of taking my notes home, and as a clinician, I always like I just needed to go home and finish my day, and then over the
Mhm.
weekend I would dig into my weekly notes and quickly chicken scratch something that would give me let me exit out of it. So why is the efficient timing of your node completion so important into this revenue cycle? And what are some of the steps to ensure that your nodes are complete?
You know, like I said, when we were talking about the payers coming back years later to do take backs, we don't have that luxury. The second the visit happens, the clock starts ticking for us. So we have timely filing deadlines to get our claims to the payers. Typically, it's somewhere between 90 and 120 days. Some payers are a little more punitive and will go 60 days. And you have to take into account too that when you sign the note, there could be other issues that need to get resolved between the note getting signed and the claim actually making it to the payer. So if the revenue team tries to submit it and there's some sort of rejection on the front end because they need a piece of information from the patient, or we need a piece of information from the patient, until that payer has accepted our claim into their system, that timely filing clock continues to tick, unfortunately. So, um, you know, typically I've seen a lot of clinicians maybe take 3, 4 days to get the documentation done. That's not usually a huge deal. I've seen some folks who do them monthly. That can definitely be a huge deal. Um, because you also have payers during audits who will take note of the fact that there's a massive discrepancy between the date of service and the date of signature, and call into question the entire note because of that. Um, so it's very important to get it done as quickly as possible so you're not delaying getting paid for the work that you do. So you're not having any kinds of issues on audits. I think things like the Spry AI dictation that I, as a non-clinical person, had a lot of fun playing with on our test site. Um, is a great tool to help clinicians get their documentation done a lot faster, a lot more thoroughly, without, you didn't get into this because you love writing notes, right? You got into this because you love helping people feel better and you want to focus on that. So tools like the AI scribe, I think, are a great balance between getting your note out quickly and maintaining as much focus as possible on the patients.
Yeah, and we receive so much pushback, I think, from people who have settled in with their early first generation EMR systems, these systems that have lived for the last 15 years, that are like they're your Toyota Corolla, 1987 Toyota Corolla, right, with manual crank windows. It does the job in a way,
So,
but it's inefficient. So, like to finish a daily note takes 15 minutes, which is a drag, and you don't have that time. So that creates a delay. It almost becomes a negative feedback loop that because it's hard to finish a note, you don't want to finish the note. But there's a downstream effect, which you were just saying, is that if you are delayed, the payer looks at it as a something inefficiency and will investigate further. So that's why investment into smart systems like Spry is such a golden opportunity to not just improve satisfaction with your workplace, but actually improve the payment of your work, right? So right on. It's
yeah.
really interesting.
And like I understand. I have a small practice owner that I work with. He's growing. He doesn't have a ton of time. He sees a huge book of patients. It's behind. So I'm realistic about the fact that it's going to take him a while to catch up, and tell him, you know, prioritize your governmental payers. Let's not play with Medicare. Prioritize your commercial payers, your work comp. The self-pays are still important because anytime you put hands on someone, you need to get them, you need to get that documentation in there from a liability standpoint. But if you're going to let anything get a bit in arrears, make it the self-pays, not the insurance. So I understand that life happens, especially for small practice owners. And there's ways to kind of stratify and prioritize to make sure that you are not falling behind on everything.
Exactly. So even there, you have strategies, and I think I'm so
Hmm.
grateful that we have this time that like you can prioritize the payers, and even if you're going
Hmm.
to be delayed, don't delay on everyone. Exactly,
Exactly.
structure. Exactly, have
Still good with math.
structure. Yeah. Have strategy. The,
Yes.
the beautiful word is strategy. So thank you, Sarah. That's wonderful. So now let's cover into the frozen goals attract Yeti. You've exceeded therapeutic indication, which is I never heard of Yeti. That's wonderful. So let's talk about the goals, goal setting, frozen goals, and what is a Yeti.
That was my inspiration. I don't know. I was having too much fun with it. I figure it's a boring topic for clinicians, so I tried to make it a little fun. Um, so I think the goals are often a overlooked part of the note. A lot of times, clinicians will do a great job on their subjective and objective and getting those updated, and will sometimes gloss over the goals and just continue copying them forward and copying them forward and copying them forward. And to a payer, when they're reviewing your notes, be that they requested it to review the claim or at an audit later on, if they're looking at carbon copies of your last goals and things aren't really moving a lot, it looks like the patient is just stagnating. So make sure to take a moment to update where they are in terms of their existing goals, and update. Um, Things happen. Maybe they discovered a new deficit. At first, it was I can't walk up the stairs unassisted, and then as they got more mobile, they realized that they were having a lot of trouble getting in and out of the car by themselves. So it's not a problem to the payer if you are adding or updating goals, either because they found a new deficit or because you need to readjust the goal because you realize it's not attainable. So as long as you're documenting around those updates, that to the payer reads as reassessment and ongoing clinical judgment.
Yeah, I think that exactly. Communication is the key, and your notes, your EMR, your documentation is how you communicate with somebody who pays your bills. So you can't just look at it as like it's not a friend or a foe, but a necessary process to get paid in the system you engage in. So communicate if there is a lack of progress. And I think that's a perfect leeway into the next point, which is setbacks need a narrative. And I think that the best metaphor that I've ever learned as a clinician is that a clinical process is nonlinear. It's like riding a roller coaster. So it's like it is always ups and downs. It is always setbacks. I think just anyone has that. But setbacks need a narrative where somebody going through the recovery process, you as a clinician need to be an effective writer to express this setback in recovery process. And if you don't, to the payer, that just means that you're overutilizing, right?
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I'll let you talk. So what is the narrative? What is the optimal way of documenting somebody's roller coaster?
I mean, I think a thing that clinicians are especially hesitant to document sometimes is that the patient wasn't compliant with their home exercise plan. That happens. Humans have been a human. Um, Maybe the patient wasn't compliant with their home exercise plan and came back to you and realized that they messed up and want to recommit. Put that in your documentation. That they weren't compliant. This is the plan that we made with the patient to correct for this. And, you're justifying the ongoing need for the clinical care because you are supporting the patient in their continued recovery and through this setback. Maybe the patient had a fall and it set back their ability um, to exercise, or it aggravated the injury and it's going to slow recovery, even move recovery back. Um, that's an understandable thing. And as long as you are documenting what's happening, why it's happening, if you know, and your plan as a clinician, that will continue to justify your skilled care.
Yeah, I think it's again, it's just a matter of you being a good at documenting what is
Mhm,
happening, right?
mhm.
Think of it as a narrative. It's like if you're watching a football game, and we're going to watch Super Bowl next week, and so there's going to be a play-by-play broadcaster. Like they have a purpose. You can put them on mute, and you're just watching a game, but not everything makes sense. But you have these individuals. They're broadcasters. They're telling you exactly what's going on in the game and their interpretation of it. I think as a clinician, you are the broadcaster of somebody's clinical experience. You need to be. And we see this as an evil, right? We have to document. I think you need to reframe it into, I get to document, I get to narrate what is actually happening in a clinical space. And if I don't, then I don't get paid for it. And I just volunteered an hour of my time to get denied, and joke's on you. So, but again, the smart systems are here to support you. Spry
Mhm.
is a smart system. We have a system of engineering logic that helps you do this effectively, efficiently, quickly, and well. And that's why it's like if you're using a first generation system and it takes you a long time to document setbacks, we're here. So let's look into then the repetition is a tell. And I, again, this is like a confessional because, uh,
You
right?
feel called out right now, Alex?
God, yeah, it's all coming out. Like it's all going to come out. The truth comes out. It's my notes are absolutely ridiculously disgusting. And one of the things I'm guilty of is that progresses well, continue to perform care. Like I fall into the trap of writing the same note redundantly time after time, especially for a repeat patient. So it's like a patient presents to physical therapy, complains of pain, progressing well, continue to perform therapy next visit, right? It is a deja vu all over again. And let's discuss, what does it mean to the payer when you're writing a note like this, when your every note looks like the one before, and why it's important to have variability in your notes and to actually have substance to your notes.
Absolutely. And I think it's even a bigger deal now in the age of technology because it's not a human being reading through it and looking for patterns. It's AI, it's bots looking through it. And um, they are a lot better at finding these patterns than human eyes are oftentimes. And it can be things like, United Healthcare wanting a note with every single visit or Aetna wanting a note with every single visit. It's not a human looking at notes days and days apart. It's a robot doing it. And they can much more easily spot these repetitive patterns than they could in the past. And you have a lot more problems with it. Um, to the payer, it's looking like care is kind of stagnating. Maybe you're not doing reassessments. If you're not updating your exercises in a meaningful way over time, they might question if any more progression is possible and say, this isn't medically necessary anymore. You need to discharge to a home exercise plan. Um, it's important on your plans of care as well that you're updating it in a meaningful way to reflect the patient's current condition. All right, if we start getting into those repetitive plans of care, we have the same issue where the payer's going, well, this isn't medically necessary anymore. Um, so it's important to make sure that you're continuing to justify ongoing treatment and skilled intervention. Otherwise, you'll start seeing those medical necessity denials or the clawbacks on audit.
Thank you for that. And I think again, it's so important to just hear that it is essential to have this process, and it is essential for if you are an administrator or if you would delegate responsibility to other clinicians working under your faculty, under your staff. Everyone has to understand, if you're documenting, this documentation has to be cohesive and it has to reflect the services rendered in the moment, not be repetitive just to finish up the note. So that is wonderful. So then let's talk about patterns and pattern recognition, and patterns matter more than a single note. I think this is so insightful and so important that your notes tell a story, and so
Mhm.
pattern matters more. And I think of reading a book, and we've all read those books where every chapter is like the chapter before. That you quickly get bored and tired of it. You just like you've seen this before. I think seeing patterns of reflected in your documentation, as you were referencing, especially to an AI agent, which AI agent is a pattern recognition agent. Like that's the models that are used by payers. That's what they do. They're algorithms that detect logic and patterns in your documentation. They don't even care much the substance per se, but they do recognize patterns. And so that pattern recognition on a dynamic computer side, on a receptor, is there already. So you as a clinician, you have to identify which patterns are presented and you change it. But let's first define what patterns are bad and what patterns are advocated and called for?
My main message with patterns is that I just said a lot of scary stuff. Um, but one bad note or one patient that's an outlier and has a really long episode of care or needs really long visits isn't going to evoke the ire of Blue Cross Blue Shield and Aetna. Um, it's not the one off that's going to draw unwanted attention to you or lead to negative outcomes for you on the whole. It's a consistent pattern of this happening over many different patients to where the majority of your patients have one or more of these issues in the documentation. So what draws attention from payers is not a one-off, but a pattern of behavior. Like Alex said, they have robots now to look for those patterns. It's kind of funny as we're getting more and more technology on the EMR side, like Spry with the AI solution, the note takers. It's kind of our robots versus their robots, you know.
I think it's so I think it's so interesting, right? To know and to understand that ultimately it will become an AI against AI logic. AI and Spry is a smart system, like, but what makes it smart? What makes it actually an advanced system is that we are setting up logical algorithms that help better encode this information so that the payer understands what we do with patients.
Mhm.
And so dumb logic is a linear logic. It's that A plus B equals C. A not less dumb logic, which is what we do, is connecting nodes and understanding the relationship between these nodes and how they play into a larger ecosystem. And that's that understanding that complex dynamics system. The complexity is you're a provider, your patient. You as a provider, you have complexity. The patient brings complexity. The clinical process brings complexity, and the payer logic brings complexity, satisfying payer logic. So in order to truly weed out all of the like the loose spaghetti inside a bowl and each spaghetti node having its own meaning, you need smart systems to bend it all together. And that's what we do here at Spry is where we have the really smart people sitting somewhere in their bunker coding all of this stuff, right? And then we have really smart revenue cycle administrator like Sarah that oh God, but right, like you understand this and you understand all of this. And so then as a provider, it's a partnership, which I think this is like the next point, which is it's a group project.
Mhm.
You're not there alone. You're not sitting in your bunker alone, but everyone has a part to play. And so it's important to point that collaboration and a collaborative effort that a system plus a payer plus a provider plus a patient equals brilliant healthcare delivery process. And in the right system, good systems operate with minimal effort and minimal energy consumption. Bad systems drain you of energy, drain you of everything. So let's go into this with you. Like, what does it mean to you to be a group project, to be a collaborative effort?
Yeah. Like your billers never want to bug you. It's the last thing we want. I think on the whole, our personalities are a lot more introverted. And we look at clinicians, um, 12 hours a day, seeing however many patients, and think I would be exhausted in about a half an hour. And I would do that.
Mhm.
So I think we empathize with the amount of energy that you put into patient care every single day. And the last thing you want to do is bug you by going, Alex, I need you to put this modifier here on code 97530. So, when we do reach out to ask for an addendum, updating a clinical modifier, updating a diagnosis code, it's because we want to get you paid. Like I said earlier, clinicians didn't go to school because they find it fun dealing with insurance companies and writing documentation.
Mhm.
Clinicians went to school because they want to help people. So your billing team exists to help you, so you don't have to live in those payer portals or on the phone for an hour getting bounced around the globe. Um, they exist to try to make you as much money as they possibly can for the services that you're rendering.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it's so important to understand too is that we tend to have a very singular myopic worldview. So I'm a clinician. I'm here to take care of patients, but you're not. You are a service provider, and you have responsibilities, and your responsibilities go from very basic that you just wear clean shirt to work because your appearance has an effect, an impact on your service delivery,
Hmm.
to more complex that you have a responsibility to deliver a note, to justify your care. Otherwise, if you don't justify your care, you don't get reimbursed, and if you don't get reimbursed, like you can't justify getting paid for your service. So it is a group process. So and then you have professionals like Sarah, and there's a concept called domain expertise. Sarah is a domain expert. Sarah is a domain expert in revenue cycle management here at Spry, and we're lucky to have you. But you are a domain expert in physical therapy, and then we have domain experts in software engineering and artificial intelligence. It's a group effort. And with this group effort being present, we are on your side. So if you're a clinician who is delivering care, who is frustrated, frustration does not lead to change. In order to, you need to be the agent of change. And for that, you need to understand the group effort that is necessary. So I think this is wonderful, Sarah. And we're so grateful. I'm so grateful for your time and so grateful for you to be a part of this process. How, like, if as a departing ward, what would be the one thing that you would want somebody to remember who's listening to this that they can take with them to the clinic on Monday and say that I'm going to do things differently now that I've heard this podcast?
That's a good question. I think the most important thing, I think Alex really hit home with the metaphor of the book, right? You are writing the narrative of your patient's tale. And your documentation not only helps you get reimbursed for uh, the services that you're rendering, it also helps your patient get continued access to care. So if you're continuing to document your medical necessity, um, then the patient's going to continue getting access to the physical occupational therapy that they need in order to get better. So it's not all just about the bottom line, which is important because you need to keep the lights on to be there for the patient. But it's also about helping your patients get that access to care by telling their story accurately.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like be the author of your own professional book.
Mhm.
Don't release that authorship to anyone else. So, Sarah, thank you very much for this broadcast, and thank you very much for your expertise. And tell us one last thing: how, like, what is your own personal mission with this organization, but just as a professional?
Professional, I'm very passionate about supporting small practice owners, private practice owner, clinician owned practices, as opposed to the big equity groups. I work still with some clients that are doing very innovative things to remain viable as small practice owners. And I think there is a lot of benefit to patients, to clinicians, really to everyone in the system to having small clinician owned practices.
Thank you. And thank you for everyone who's listening. And I hope that this will get a fair amount of audience. And Sarah, thank you for what you do.